BBC, because they've been accused of imposing a metropolitan bias on country people with its North London socialism and use of Chris Packham. This is a new survey by the Regional Moorland Group. 38% of rural people feel the broadcaster's coverage is inaccurate. Only 2% said it was very accurate. 29% called it fairly accurate. Tell us what you think. Tim Bonner, he's Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance. Do you think the BBC, and maybe the media more generally, actually, but let's talk specifically about the BBC, actually understands the countryside, Tim?
Well, there are pockets of understanding, but frankly, with the BBC especially, the Metropolitan bias line, and this is really important, didn't come from me, it didn't come from the Moorland Groups, it came from the BBC Trust. 10 years ago, the BBC Trust did a review of its rural programming, and it said that it had a metropolitan bias. So we've been waiting, 10 years, 11 years now, for a proper response to that, for something to happen within the core, especially of the BBC's news operation, that does give some real voice to rural people, that ensures that we are represented properly. 5 years ago, Tim Davie, the outgoing DG, when he came in, he said that if you're an opinionated political campaigner, that you shouldn't be working for the BBC. And yet there are a number of high-profile presenters who work for the BBC who continue to essentially throw insults and drive their agenda against rural people and against rural activities.
What is it they don't understand? What are the rural activities or the bits of rural life that you think should be covered in a different way?
I think there's good coverage about the countryside, but there's not a lot of coverage for the countryside. So Countryfile takes some criticism from the rural community. I actually think it's a really positive programme. It gets millions of people watching, but there's not a lot of depth to it. We need to be really honest about that. It doesn't dig down into the fundamental issues which are, for instance, causing so much change in the farming sector, which has a massive impact on our environment and on the countryside as a whole. There's a need, I think, for a more considered programming which really understands rural people and represents them. But fundamentally, I think this is about, and this was what the Trust report said 10 years ago, this is about the fact that when a BBC journalist, and they are just and many of them I know well and have worked with, but they are very often from urban backgrounds without a clear understanding of rural communities. When they get a story, the first people they go to are environmental groups, are not rural, are not people within the rural community itself. Yeah. So putting in place a policy, having someone who represents, there used to be a BBC rural champion. I still haven't quite worked out how he championed the countryside, but he's left, and I don't think it's even been replaced. So there needs to be a core understanding that if you have a news gathering operation, if you have a huge bureaucracy like the BBC, and people there are drawn from urban backgrounds, there needs to be someone in there who's going to hold up their hand and say, hang on a second, have you thought about how this plays for people outside London?
It's ironic, isn't it, that the BBC lectures us so much about diversity and says it's a marvellously diverse institution, and in some ways it is, but in other ways it isn't at all. Class is something that I don't think is properly represented in the in many parts of the media, but certainly in the BBC. I don't think there are too many working class people, actual working class people, not people who pretend to be working class when actually they are now middle class, people who are actually properly from working class backgrounds who work for the BBC and aren't pretending but actually do. And similarly, people from rural backgrounds. I mean, that is true diversity. If you're going to have diversity, either have it or don't. It's not just about the colour of someone's skin or their religious background.
Absolutely, and the BBC Charter, if we go back to the very basis here, the BBC Charter talks about a BBC which is representing all the communities of the United Kingdom, and fundamentally it doesn't as far as rural people are concerned. And we're not asking for special favours, we're just asking for people to remember that when you're having a discussion, for instance about road pricing, we had the Chancellor introducing road pricing, and everyone just sort of nods. Well, hang on, think about people who live out in the countryside who have to drive 30 miles to the shop.
They don't get it, and it
just goes over their head.
And the thing, one thing, there's so many parts of the media that are talk all the time about trains, for example. I mean, the vast majority of journeys in this country are made by car, and if you use public transport, you're far more likely to use a bus than a train. I mean, I would honestly look at the BBC's transport coverage and question whether they got those facts. So this comes into so many different areas. Tim, fascinating to talk to you. There's Tim Bonner there, who's the Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance. I remember there was a tornado